Hey everybody, it's Julie and welcome to Hello Monday. This week in the studio I'm working with the Impression Obsession hydrangea die, which I absolutely adore. It has so much dimension to it. And there's also a coordinating stamp set, although I didn't use much of the stamp set in this particular project. So I'm going to die cut the whole thing all at one time from a piece of smooth Bristol paper. This is my favorite paper for watercolor work, and it's got a nice heavy weight. And it's just absolutely perfect for watercolor, especially if you want to stamp in watercolor, because it's got a smooth surface. So when you stamp, you're going to have nice crisp lines from your stamp image. And I'm going to go ahead and take the little tiny blossom. I need a ton of these little blossoms to make my hydrangea. So I'm going to separate it from the rest of the dies and continue die cutting until I have a whole bunch of them. And some of them fell out. Some of them stayed in the negative, but I'm going to anchor them all onto the sticky side of a Post-it note. And I've taken some of my favorite water-based dye inks and just pressed the pad directly to an acrylic block, and I'm going to use that as my watercolor palette. And this is kind of a great way to do double duty with your water-based dye inks. So I'm going to use a water brush to just load up with color directly from that acrylic block, and I'll just clean my brush as I switch out colors and just keep smearing. I don't have a particular method of watercolor. I'm sure there's a proper way to do it. I just load up the color and I smear it, I dilute it, I leave some white space, I add some darker here and there. I usually start with my lightest colors first and then start adding my darker just for more interest and dimension, and just kind of give it I kind of slop it around, folks. I'm sorry, there's no rhyme or reason to what I do. It's like most things, I just kind of wing it. You know, and it's like, oh, I feel so artsy, even though it's like I've had no formal art training. So once that leaf has kind of dried, I decided to add a little bit of detail just using my water brush there, so it kind of looks like the veins of the leaf. And then I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to take my Mr. Huey's and my white card base. This is white linen. I absolutely love this for a card base. It's just gorgeous. And I'm just going to spatter a little bit of that ink from the Mr. Huey's Color Mist. I like to tap the excess out of that nozzle and then just hold it over there and give it a good flick. And I'm using seafoam and leaf green, I think, because they went really well with the colors that I'd chosen to watercolor with. And you'll see the colors listed in the description over at the blog, so be sure to check that out so you know exactly what colors I used. And then I'm going to take my two-way glue pen and glue that stem down, and I like to use a piece of wax paper to go over the top so I can burnish it down, and I'm not getting glue all over my hands and then glue all over everything else and having everything stick to me. Now this is the backing for the flowers, and I've already watercolored it, and I put some foam dots there on the back, and I'm going to go ahead and mount that to the top. And as you can see, I just used the same colors I did on the little tiny blossoms, but I just did it on the back, and that'll just make sure that I have nice color backing up those little tiny blossoms. And I bobbled the sentiment the first time. I'm so mad I bobbled it. So I decided to take my Stamp-A-Majig and go over the top of it with some pigment ink and just emboss it and see if I could alleviate my bobble there. So I stamped it with some Stream pigment ink, and I'm using my Stamp-A-Majig because even though the stamp is on a clear block, I'm old. My eyes are old and I can't see straight. So even with a clear stamp and a clear block, I still use a Stamp-A-Majig. And then I'm just going to go ahead and clear emboss that. So hopefully that will give it a sharper, crisper look, because I kind of botched it on the first attempt. And I didn't want to start all over again. You know, I hate that. Don't you? When you have to start all over again? It's like, no. There's got to be a way to fix it. So hopefully that'll be good enough. And now I'm going to take my little blossoms and my stylus, and I've got it on a piece of like really thick foam, and I'm just going to push down the centers of them to give them some dimension. So the centers get pushed down and the leaves kind of pop up, and this is going to give them a little bit more dimension so they're not just flat tiny flowers. And then I'm going to use my glossy accents, and I've got that in my left hand, and then I got my tweezers in my right, because this is a little time consuming to do. It's kind of tedious, but it goes a lot faster if you'll kind of two-fist it. So I got all the blossoms on there, and I spared you the details of watching me go through that whole process. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim off the stems of the leaves and get those glued in place. And I used glue dots to anchor those down. And then I'm going to take some yellow stickles, and yes, I'm going to put a little dab of stickles in the center of each one of those. But I think it adds a nice touch of sparkle, and the whole card just turned out stunning. Thanks for watching.